So here is the reference and here is the model. You want to create it but don't know how to start? In this video I'll share some quick tips which I wished I knew when I was just starting. Tip number 1. One thing I always do is that I break down the reference in simple form, either using my own imagination and creating a visual library or on a painting software. If you are a beginner, I recommend doing it on a software like Photoshop. Just use lasso tool and fill the big shapes with primary color. That way you would be able to break down the concept easily. Tip number 2. Most beginner artists make mistakes when they jump into details too fast. I recommend if you are just beginning, start with blocking out the major shapes first. Either use low poly spheres or any other primitive, but stay low poly as long as you can until you block out the whole shape first. This method will help you read the shapes and boost your confidence, which is very important because most of the artists give up on a concept not believing in themselves. With low poly shapes, at least you will have the freedom to make the design interesting as much as you want. As you can see, I am almost finished up with the blockout. And now the model is really easy to read. Look how simple the design is, and yet it is matching with the concept completely. Primary shapes are very important for a blockout, and the more you can get the model to match with the reference, the easier it will get for you. Tip number 3. Have colors on your model as soon as possible. It really helps understanding the model if you polypaint your character at its earliest stage. You don't have to be super complicated, just fill out the model with base color. It saved me a lot of time figuring out the appeal of a character before colors. But with polypaint, it starts to give me enough boost to continue with it. Also, if you can model and polypaint the eyes too. Eyes can really help get the feel of a character. It is a window to the soul after all. As you can see, these are just simple shapes, but with just polypaint, I can already see my character having a life. Tip number 4. Always pay attention to a silhouette. It is a very important tool ZBrush provides and people often ignores it. Silhouette is one of the foundation of a character design and 2D artists use it to make their characters interesting. In ZBrush, we have the exact tool here which is called a silhouette screen. It basically shows a diffuse shadow of a character. The trick is to make it much interesting as possible. To know if a character has a good silhouette, see if you can recognize it by watching this image. This sounds so little but holds a very strong foundation in a character design. It also forces you to focus on your primary shapes, which is very important because you cannot see any secondary or tertiary details in a silhouette, but only by improving the primary shapes will make it better. So guys, always pay attention to a silhouette of your character during a blockout. It will help you a lot. Tip number 5. Know your proportions. Proportion is the fastest thing people get wrong and it can throw up your work really quickly. You have to be very careful with it from the beginning. It is as important as the silhouette. Let's take this image for example. This image is by artist named Nestrix and he is playing a certain cute factor on this character. Not because of the facial expression but with the proportions as well. Of course facial expressions play a vital role, but for the cute factor he made the head larger compared to a whole body. You can also take the example of a real human baby. Their heads are always larger than the body, but if you make the head smaller by any chance, it would look really weird and unnatural. This is the same principle which would be applied when using a reference. If you mess up the proportions somehow, no details or texturing will gonna save your character from looking messed up. So what I do with the reference is measure up the big primary parts. Remember tip number 1 about breaking the design into simple forms? Do the same here, but you have to figure out the width and length of these parts too, as well as the shapes. Try to simplify shapes not just by the design but with the proportions as well. Well, to sum up this video, I will revise what I have just explained in simple words. Start with a simple base mesh such as sphere or a cube and refine the shapes to create the overall silhouette of a character. Use simple and clean shapes to define the major features of a character, such as the head, torso and limbs. Avoid adding too much detail at this stage as it can be difficult to make changes later on. Use reference images or sketches to help guide the design of a character, but don't be afraid to experiment and try out different ideas. Keep your blockout as low as possible. This will make it easier to work with and modify, and will also help you focus on the overall form and proportions of your character. As you work constantly, check your character from different angles and in different poses to ensure that it looks balanced, well proportioned and has a good silhouette. Last but not the least, Keep practicing and have consistency. See you on the next video. Goodbye.